You're listening to the Fantasy Wildcard Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Wildcard Dynasty Show. I'll be your host this week, Ali. You can follow me on Twitter or on X, should we say? I don't know what it is now. at FF Dynasty Grill. And with me as always is my amazing, beautiful co-host Kev, who you can follow on Twitter, we're going to say, at Dynasty_Go. How you doing tonight, Kev?
Well, Ali, I'm doing all right, actually. Yeah, been a little bit under the weather, which has been a shame because it's summer. But yeah, it's a great time of the year. Got all the charity tournaments coming to a close. Final draft started. Also in a couple of Dynasty startups, Dynasty Best Ball League with our guest today as well. So that's going to be a fun to see how that pans out in time. But yeah, just this time last year I had COVID, so I missed this show with this guest. So I'm sure tonight's show will make up for that. It'll be the perfect remedy to get me back on track. How about you, Ali?
Yeah, I'm also under the weather, but getting through it with plenty of drafts right now. There's still plenty of charity drafts going on. Not in a startup, but I'm commissioning a startup, which is really entertaining. But yeah, feeling really good, and I'm excited for tonight's show. So we'll get straight on with our guest here. It's a best ball writer over at Fantasy Pros and an amazing co-host at the amazing Fantasy Sanctuary. So go check him out on YouTube. So we give a warm wildcard return to the man, the myth, the legend. It is Tom Strachan, who you can follow on Twitter at NFL_TStrack. Tom, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. It's great to be back on with you guys. It was great seeing you both at the UKFFC a couple of weeks ago. And, I think this might be third year in a row we've done this show now, talking about Dynasty Best Ball. And yeah, I can't think of a podcast I'd like on more at this time of year and people I'd like to be chatting more about fantasy football with.
Absolutely nailed it. Yep. Cannot wait to have you on tonight and talking all things Dynasty Best Ball. Again, it's still a format that I've not involved enough in, so hopefully you're going to persuade me to join another Best Ball startup before the start of the season. So yeah, on tonight's show, we'll be talking all things Dynasty Best Ball. So we're going to include players to buy and sell in this format. So Kev, you got a question to start it off for Tom?
Yeah, we'll just give a bit of background to the audience for anyone that's not familiar with the format and sort of give you a bit of a rundown as to what it is that the strategy and tips which are useful in this format, and then also why we need to be playing more of these type of leagues. So I guess the first question, the simple question, is, Tom, what is Dynasty Best Ball?
Yeah, so Dynasty Best Ball, it just removes all that weekly lineup setting. Like traditional Best Ball, every week the system is looking at what your optimal lineup is out of the players available on your roster, and it takes all the stress of having to set the lineup. And we were talking before the show about a final which I beat Kevin, where I had Mike Evans and I had chose to start him. But in Dynasty Best Ball, you eliminate those worries, and those players who you perhaps feeling a little lukewarm on, and you can't bring yourself to drop them in, drops them in for you. I think what we've kind of found from Dynasty Best Ball over the last few years is it's finding the right balance of managed and being able to sit back, because one of the great things about them is not needing to manage them as routinely as you do with leagues where you're setting lineups every week. So typically in the leagues I commission, I think you're pretty similar, Kev. It's like you'll have a waiver run before the start of the season, then every 4 weeks during the season, and then maybe one during the off season. And in a lot of my leagues, I've ballooned the roster sizes up during the off season to let people stash more players. And then a week or so before the league starts, people are forced to cut down, which makes for an entertaining waiver run at that point. And yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun. It's an easy way to add more leagues without going, okay, what am I going to do on a Sunday evening or Sunday morning when I've got to set all these lineups? That's the league which I just skim over when I'm selecting all my leagues where I've got issues.
Love it. Personally, I've ticked over the 20 league mark again for Dynasty League. So it is an absolute mad Sunday mornings trying to set all them lineups. So I need to jump into more Dynasty Best Balls. So Tom, what is the key strategy, and is there any tips that you can share with us to do well in these Dynasty Best Ball leagues?
So I think the biggest point is to approach it more like Dynasty than you would Best Ball. Obviously, in Best Ball, in big tournaments like Best Ball Mania or DraftKings Millie Maker, you're shooting to compete against maybe hundreds, thousands of people at a time. Whereas in a Dynasty Best Ball league, you're only competing against 11 people. You don't need those complete moonshot players to be on your roster all the time if they're taking lots of zeros. So I definitely approach it more like Dynasty. But some of the key differences is that if you're a contender, you need to make sure you have a roster of players who are playing. You can't be carrying injured players. You can't be carrying players who, aren't performing well. You want to make sure that if you have to trade a player like, say like Breece Hall last year, trade him for somebody a little bit lower, like a tier of player who isn't as good long term. But if you can package it in a way which gives you good value, and then you got somebody like, I don't know, say like a Joe Mixon or Alvin Kamara, who at least you knew was going to be playing and would keep your roster alive. That's definitely big. In terms of stacking, that's a question I get quite often about this. And I think typically in startups, I'm aiming to stack quarterbacks and pass catchers who are tied together for a long time. So, think of the players who they're not going to change teams, like your Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, your Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, players who've been tied together through big contracts, or rookies who are at the start of their career and got good draft capital, and that you can have good faith in the fact that you've probably got 2 or 3 years, which is the kind of window we talk about playing within anyway, where those two are going to be stacked. And yeah, generally, as you go through the draft, then I might be more tempted to pick up like Tyler Higbee if I've got Matthew Stafford, because then you just, if Tyler Higbee's having a good season, there's a good chance that most of his points coming through passing touchdowns. He's very unlikely to suddenly start rushing him, and that's going to just add to that little stack a bit. But I definitely don't overstack in Dynasty Best Ball, whereas if you watch some of my Best Ball draft streams, you might see me stacking 4 or 5 players from the same team together.
Yeah, I think you make some cracking points there as to the strategy, and a lot of those points you've shared over time, and I've took these on board in my Dynasty Best Ball leagues as well. So great for you to share that. And then I guess I've moved towards more Dynasty Best Ball leagues for obvious reasons, which you touched upon a little bit there. But I guess my question is around why would a Dynasty player want to play more Dynasty Best Ball leagues? Why should they be playing more Dynasty Best Ball leagues and adding that to their portfolio?
I think one of the fun things with like fantasy football in general is it's fun to play different formats, isn't it? Like, very few people I know play just redraft or just Dynasty or just Best Ball. Like, I do know some people who do that, but the majority of us, like, we all enjoy these different formats, and Dynasty Best Ball is something which perhaps quite a few people still haven't played, and it's nice. And for reasons we talked about before, not having to set your lineups is great, but it's also fun for the weeks where, let's say, you were a massive, I don't know, like, let's take James Prochet, player who I picked up a bit of stick for taking the camp hype last year. But let's say James Prochet, he's been on your roster week in, week out, and then he pops up with like a 30-point haul at one point, or like, like Marquez Valdes-Scantling, these players who can be boom or bust, but when they really boom, it can be just deliver you a week-winning performance. So those are the players that in normal redraft or normal dynasty managed leagues, they're tricky to start. Look at Cole Kmet last year. He had a complete miserable season and then exploded for like 2 or 3 weeks in a row. But you definitely didn't start in the first week where he exploded, because before that he'd averaged like barely any points for a couple of weeks. And then the week after he exploded, did you have faith in him to start him then? Because it was very easy to see that he could regress back to what he did before that, but then he gave you another great performance. So Dynasty Best Ball, it just takes away those headaches. You can say, oh yeah, I was right about this. This is exactly what I expected, and nobody can prove you wrong because you didn't have to worry about actually clicking the start or drop button.
Yeah, I think as well, just like if you play in a number of leagues, it's the maintenance, the fact that you're doing your 4 waiver runs in the leagues you run and your trades that you can pick up and choose as when you go. So I think anyone playing a high number of leagues should be taking on more Dynasty Best Ball than pure Dynasty, in my eyes.
100%. And personally, for me, I like to think that I'm a good drafter from rounds maybe 12 through to 18, 20. And in Dynasty, they're the players that, as you touched on there, Tom, it's difficult to start in any given game unless there's injuries. But in Dynasty Best Ball, obviously that takes that away. And you're able to show your ability that you can draft a full roster and have players that can help you win weeks from that you wouldn't normally start. So that's personally why I like it. So yeah, we'll move on to the start section. We're going to move on to Tom's buys. So Tom, we're going to start at the quarterback selection. So who's your first Dynasty Best Ball buy?
So yeah, I'm buying Geno Smith. Like, I'm pretty confident in Geno Smith and that he's going to be good for a longer period than people are possibly expecting him to be. Like, I think you look at what the Seahawks have done. You look at those offensive weapons, and there's an argument that, you know, a year from now we could be talking about them as like up there in the best wide receiver trios in the league. Last year he finished as the QB8 in points per game, and since then they've upgraded weapons. You know, if you're playing on a 2 to 3 year window, Geno got enough of a contract where I think you can have enough faith in him. Last year he was 7th best in QB rating, had the 3rd most big time throws. He was 11th in passing EPA, which is an efficiency metric, and he was 1st in completion rate. So it's like, no matter what you look at, Geno had a really solid season. You look at the weapons he's got now, and Jackson Smith-Njigba can be exactly the kind of player who's going to be great for him. So yeah, I think if you're talking about a late first, maybe a second plus a little bit of sugar on top, like, that's a price I'd be willing to pay for 2 to 3 years of what I'm expecting to be pretty fruitful fantasy performances.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it. I think personally, my outlook on Dynasty has changed the last couple of years, where I was tending to have a bit of a larger window, but I've tended to try and narrow it down. So I'm only focused on the next couple of years. And if you're talking about a quarterback who you can draft, as you mentioned, fairly cheap for that price, that can come in as your quarterback 2, but finishes with quarterback 1 numbers, Geno Smith absolutely fits that bill. And as you mentioned, the weapons that he's got now with Jackson Smith-Njigba, fallen to pick 20 in the draft, was a bit of a shock to me. Fantastic wide receiver. They're going to find ways to get all 3 of those wide receivers on the field. I've got no doubt about that. So yeah, the ceiling for Geno Smith is easily as high as it was last year. So it's a great guy to go after, and still attainable at that price.
Yeah, Tom comes on, griefs me, and then he saves himself with the Geno Smith love. I mean, Geno is one of my most owned QBs in Dynasty. I think everything you've said is spot on. A lot of it's to do with situation, the fact that the weapons are immense. Last season, he was so efficient, like completion percentage might have been like all-time record or close to it. I know that there was talk of that. But yeah, I think as well, yeah, I don't think he's going to be as accurate this season, but you see the weapons have been improved. He had 366 rushing yards with 1 touchdown. So you'd like to think if that just comes up a little bit, say 4, that's going to give him room to go either way, I guess, and sort of make up the points that way. Back to his rookie season when he was back at the Jets, he had 366 yards and 6 rushing touchdowns. So if you went all the way back there, that's mega points in it. It's 30 fantasy points on your league, nearly 2 points a game. So yeah, I love Geno Smith. I think he's great. QB 21. I'm very much there at that. I'd maybe have him a little bit higher in certain situations, and in this particular format, it makes him really appealing because you've got several stack options on the back of it.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think there's still a few people out there that just saying maybe was it just a 1 season wonder? Can he bounce back and play at the same level as he did last year? So especially with the contract as well, some people have got question marks there, which I think why is keeping him at quarterback 21. But for me, he's definitely higher in my ranking. So a great quarterback to target. Move on to the running back position. So Tom, who is your running back buy for Dynasty Best Ball?
I'm buying Smash P Ryan, and this isn't about Javonte Williams' health in particular. I think that plays a big part in it, and he's somebody that all off season I've been trying to pick up, and it's been tricky because when there was reports that perhaps Javonte Williams could miss this entire season, people who had Smash P Ryan weren't definitely looking to move him on. But now that Javonte Williams is avoiding PUP or doing better than expected, I think it's opened a good buy window. And you look at where Smash P Ryan came from. He came from the Bengals, a Super Bowl contending team, and they offered him the exact same contract as the Broncos did, but he chose to go to the Broncos because Sean Payton personally pitched him on how he likes to use two running backs. And you go back over his last 15 seasons in New Orleans, he was always looking for two running backs to be used consistently. Like when he paired Alvin Kamara with Mark Ingram between 2017 to 2018, or Latavius Murray for 2019 to 2020, Kamara never really saw a huge amount of touches more than the backup. They were quite often near to identical. Yes, Kamara was able to turn them into more fantasy points because he was explosive, because he saw the high value passing down work. But P. Ryan's a player that I think can be a free down running back, particularly if Javonte Williams struggles. We saw how good P. Ryan was last year. He was more efficient than Joe Mixon with 4.2 yards per carry to Mixon's 4.0, 26 missed tackles to Mixon's 33, but on 110 fewer attempts. And also in yards per reception, P. Ryan had 7.6 compared to Mixon's 7.3. So part of that is just a ding on Joe Mixon, who's starting to look a bit washed at this point in his career. But it's also, we can buy into Smash P. Ryan. We can believe that there's a decent ceiling there. And even if Javonte Williams is healthy, why is Smash P. Ryan not going to get a healthy amount of touches when the Broncos aggressively pursued him in free agency?
Yeah, again, Tom, I love this pick. Smash P. Ryan's a guy that we talked about in our sleeper show. So I actually saw a debate last night on Twitter. A guy we've had on our show before, David Gautier, who was basically arguing for Smash P. Ryan, and he was going on about the 2.5 games that he played where Mixon missed 30.2 fantasy points, 19.3 fantasy points, 21.5 fantasy points, 4 touchdowns in those 3 games, 4 plus receptions in those 3 games. Javonte's hurt. You've got Sean Payton. You've just adding all that together. You've got a potential running back one for those couple of weeks that maybe Javonte isn't firing, or if it becomes half a season, the majority of the season. I can see that happening. I think there's a massive possibility that P. Ryan outscores Javonte this season. So I'm totally there with you. I think, like you mentioned, he's a free down guy. He can pass block, pass catch. He could do more for his size, if I'm honest, because he's a big dude and he doesn't run as fierce as he could. But he's been around the league. He's stuck around for a while. And like you said, he was on a potential Super Bowl contender last season. He chose to come this route for more playing time. The other thing on P. Ryan as well is I think at the moment there's a lot of uncertainty in the running back landscape with holdouts, and you saw Jonathan Taylor has to be traded the other night as well. I think for these owners that have got maybe a question mark for the running back one, rather than panic sell and selling an amazing asset like Taylor at a low price, I'd be more likely to go and buy P. Ryan for a 3rd rounder or something along those lines. And then you've got that flexibility to when Taylor picks up his value again, you've got more options that way. So he's a cheap alternative to keep you ticking along on your contending teams.
Yeah, you're both smart guys, really. P. Ryan is someone that I've been extremely interested in. And at RB47, I mean, how many running backs that are going amongst where he's going have the free down capability and have an opportunity to start the season as the running back one? Well, not many. So I can only see his value going up the first half of the season. Certainly, I can't see Javonte Williams taking on a big workload early on. They're going to be careful with him when they've got P. Ryan for that role. So absolutely love the pick. I can only see his value increasing. And then perhaps you can move him on, or you've got the certainty of having a guy that's going to be featured even when Javonte's back at full speed. So, really like that. I think the Broncos certainly do some upgrades, and their offense is going to be better than it was last year.
We just need the P. Ryan, Tyler Beatty combo in the backfield.
Please. We'll move on to the wide receiver, and this is a guy who's also trying to bounce back for this season.
Yeah, so Deebo Samuel, and we're getting such a discount on his former pricing. This time a year ago, it was like wide receiver 5. It was like, no matter where you looked at rankings, pretty much, we were talking about a player who was viewed as a top 5 wide receiver because of his rushing ability, because of everything else. Now you go look at wide receiver rankings, and he's down to like 28. I've seen places where he's fallen outside the top 30. And then, okay, you look back, what's affected that over that period? Okay, yes, the Niners added CMC, but when they added CMC, Deebo's touches went from 8.0 per game down to 7.8. So you're talking like a marginal difference. And that was whilst he was dealing with injuries. We know he had a contract dispute last year, which he's talked about. He felt he came into the season underprepared because of it. The team went from Trey Lance to Jimmy G to Brock Purdy. So it wasn't a smooth season. But when he was healthy, when everyone was healthy, Deebo led the team in target share. Like George Kittle was at the bottom, and we'll get to him a little bit later. But talking about like what Deebo did in targets per route running the 5 games that Brock Purdy, CMC, and Deebo played together, Samuel had 0.26, CMC 0.23, Ayuk and Kittle 0.19. So like he was maximizing the stuff that he did get. And yeah, I think that we could be looking back a year now and going, man, we really missed the boat on Deebo because we've seen him be a league winner before. We see that they designed so many matchups for him, particularly against man coverage. We see that they designed so many touches and that he's in the first read so often. Why would we not hire on him after a season where we knew that he'd had a difficult offseason? And I started the offseason kind of out on Deebo, and it's taken smarter people than me talking about all these little things and little moments and bits that have come together to kind of piece it together and go, okay, well, actually, when you kind of deep dive stats and everything looks really positive, and I'm really betting on him to have a really good season.
Yeah, I mean, exactly the same lines as you, Tom. I've been vocal on this show saying that I very much rate Brandon Ayuk higher than Deebo Samuel in Dynasty, but the fact that Ayuk has just risen so much in value to a point where it's a little bit too high and it's gone the other way, and Deebo Samuel is so much more of a value right now. I'm sort of tilting back the other way of Deebo Samuel. And then you look at the stats that you've given there, factor in Brock Purdy as well. We know that he's coming back from that elbow injury. Is he going to be able to throw deep very often? Deebo Samuel was the perfect guy that's going to take the ball on the line of scrimmage or between sort of 5 to 10 yards out and just have that yak ability. So I think Deebo Samuel was actually in for a big year this year, and wide receiver 27. Yeah, I can certainly see that creeping up with what we know his ceiling can be because of that. What wide receiver, what was it, 3 finish he had a couple of seasons ago?
Yeah, I'm not 100% there on Deebo in respect of Brock Purdy's still a question mark for me. I've been quite low on him in the sense of you've got Deebo, McCaffrey, Ayuk, Kittle. Someone's not going to hit their ADP, and it's guessing who. It could be Deebo, it could be Kittle, it could be Ayuk. I think CMC is pretty all right, but what I will say is Deebo is a better fit for me in this format than your regular Dynasty, because you are going to have headache weeks where you're playing him in Dynasty and the get out to an early lead. He's not part of a few explosive plays and then just milking it down. So I like him better in this format than Dynasty. I think, like I say, his value compared to where it has been does make him a value as such. But it's the volatility that does scare me as to what that offense will be, what it will look like as well. I think
it's like the Niners in general. The pass catchers are going to be a headache this year, and for Dynasty Best Ball, you do kind of remove that. But yeah, I think all the signs for me point towards Deebo being that kind of guy. I mean, he was the wide receiver 1 on first reads of target share last year, like 25%. Ayuk was Deebo is the design player. I think Brandon Ayuk has this huge ceiling that if perhaps he was on a different offense, we could absolutely see unlocked. But yeah, it's just kind of hard to gauge which of these Niners players is going to pop off for a big week.
Yeah, and I just think with Deebo in that range, a lot of it will come down to what your first 2 wide receivers look like that you've taken, or your first 3, or your first one, however you're building your roster. I think volatility, you can embrace it more in Dynasty Best Ball. But let's say you've got, I don't know, Quentin Johnston and Jameson Williams, or guys like that. Quentin Johnston and Christian Watson will say they're above me in ADP. Would you want to take a Deebo in that respect? Maybe because it's Dynasty Best Ball, but I do think, just there'll be certain scenarios where he's more appealing, especially if you're a big fan like Ali and you've got Brock Purdy in every league.
I was about to say, come on, I need to get you believing more in Brock Purdy, Kev, going forwards. You'll soon see the powers of Brocky. But perhaps we'll move on to the tight end, where I think we're all going to agree on this dynasty buy.
Yeah, so Juwan Johnson, and it just feels like, if a tight end went out there and scored the 3rd most touchdowns amongst the position, normally that's a player who we'd spend the next offseason hyping up. I mean, you think about who we've hyped up as a community over the last few years, players like Cole Kmet. And then Juwan Johnson goes out and only scores less touchdowns than Travis Kelce and George Kittle, at the same time as dealing with Taysom Hill in the offense, which obviously he's still got to do. But I think this is the better in best ball type play, because there will be weeks on that Saints offense where it's Taysom Hill, or there'll be weeks where Chris Olave steals the show. But we've seen Derek Carr lean into his tight end position at times. Andy Dalton really did seem to connect with Juwan Johnson. But Juwan Johnson didn't have a really great run of things last year. He ranked 47th in catchable target rate amongst tight ends with 20-plus targets. Meanwhile, Darren Waller, who was playing with Derek Carr, ranked 11th. You can make an argument that Juwan Johnson is going to be touchdown reliant. In the games where he didn't score touchdowns, he averaged 4.8 PPR points, which isn't fantastic. But at cost with Juwan Johnson, the hype has never really pushed him up. You're talking tight end 23. Tight end 22 is Irv Smith, who has done the sum total of F all. Meanwhile, and I know that we all love these rookie tight ends who've come in, but I wrote an article for Underdog earlier this year talking about how rookie tight ends, on average, 75% of them don't manage to score 6.5 PPR points on average per game through the rookie season. So if I feel like there's even a chance I could contend, going out and giving up the 302, the 303 for Juwan Johnson, who we've seen be productive and we've seen be a weapon in the red zone, I'll do that all day.
God, I love this pick. Juwan Johnson, what a guy! Just everything you've said resonates with me. Touchdowns, people will stick the hat on that and say, oh, well, it's a lot of his production with touchdowns. Look at tight ends that do anything, outside the top 6, that it's because they get touchdowns. So it is what it is. There's clear connections between how Carr used Waller, and that Waller's a guy that's obviously a big fast dude like Juwan Johnson. He used to be a wide receiver, so I think that he's still got room to grow into the role itself. And tight end 23, what a steal. If you're taking one of these early tight ends, your Andrews, Pitts, whatever, then you can wait till the low end sort of tight end 23 get Juwan Johnson. That's theft, honestly. I've got nothing else to say. Why is he there?
No, we like Juwan Johnson. I think he's fallen out of grace, but just because of the hype amongst the younger tight ends, the rookies that have come in. There's been quite a few decent rookies that we think can project to be good dynasty assets. But I think if you're especially a contender, Michael Mayer, Sam Laporta, they're ones that can take a couple of years to develop. We've seen that throughout the years. So you can flip them for Juwan Johnson plus. I think is a decent move for a contender. He shouldn't be down there at tight end 23, that's for sure, because he's going to outperform that every single season. So we'll move on to the dynasty sales. So I'm naturally at the quarterback position. So Tom, here is your first dynasty sell.
It's Aaron Rodgers, and this one kind of hits home for me because I have a team which it was truly a complete mess in Dynasty this year. And one of the few marketable assets I had was Aaron Rodgers. But it was so incredibly hard early this year to try and convince anyone to give up anything of value for Aaron Rodgers. You know, you'd say, okay, well, I'd like, if I can't get a late first, I'd like an early second plus something else sprinkled on top. And people are like, oh, I'm not paying that for 1 year of Aaron Rodgers. And it's like, okay, but now we've got the new contract, and it's so welcome for Dynasty managers because it gives you your last chance to say, right, I can move on from him, or you can accept that you're never going to really see any value for him and just saddle up and just, much like many of us did with Tom Brady, you just hold him and just accept that his fantasy value in terms of returns might be nothing more than points. I think when you look at what Aaron Rodgers has done over the years, back when he was last an MVP in 2021 or 2022, say 2021, it all seemed to be clicking, and it feels very comparable that Garrett Wilson could be that kind of Devontae Adams style play. But outside of that, I don't think the Jets pass catchers are huge upgrades on what Aaron Rodgers had last year. I mean, you know, Corey Davis might be a better player than he's being given credit for right now. But then you're talking about Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb, players who weren't particularly good last year and weren't particularly relevant. You're talking about Tyler Conklin, who's a fine sort of dart throw touchdown, and CJ Uzoma, who is frankly not a great dart throw. And then obviously Breece Hall is Breece Hall, and we know how high the ceiling can be for Breece Hall. But it's entirely possible that Aaron Rodgers just isn't going to get back to those heights that we saw him when he was the MVP. You know, last year he had 300-plus passing yard games. And yeah, I'm a fan of people who pass the ball a lot. Aaron Rodgers loves to play slow. You know, he gets to the line of scrimmage, likes to make all his pre-snap adjustments. You know, the last thing he wants to do is throw an interception. But sometimes I want the players who aren't afraid to throw the interceptions. Let's talk about famous Jameis from the year where he joined the 30-30 club. Like, those players are good for fantasy. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is going to be great in New York and by far the best quarterback we've had in years. But I think now is an easy time to decide whether you want to hop off the train or not.
Yeah, absolutely love this. I think Aaron Rodgers has been traded to the Jets for one reason alone, and that is to win a Super Bowl. So whether he throws for 50 touchdowns or he throws for 28 touchdowns, his factor is that he's there to win a Super Bowl. So he's just going to be there managing the performance. And you got to look at Dalvin Cook's probably going to sign for the Jets, and they're going to have a mammoth running back room. So are they going to lean on that? It's going to be incredibly hard to go against Dalvin Cook and Breece Hall. And then interestingly, the guy that Aaron Rodgers keeps talking about in terms of pass catchers is Jason Brownlee, a guy that no one's ever heard of, who absolutely loves. Yeah, as you mentioned, but other than Garrett Wilson, it's not a spectacular room. So I don't think we're going to see the heights of Aaron Rodgers coming back to be MVP again. I think they're going to win a hell of a lot of games. But I think it's going to be off the back of defense, running the ball, and him managing the game. So I think it's a great time to sell because you can paint a narrative that you've got Garrett Wilson there ready to be the top wide receiver in the NFL. I think it's a great point to try and sell him if you're not a contender.
I absolutely hate training camp. Like Jason Brownlee, like no one had ever heard of him, and then he's getting picked in all sorts of leagues. He got drafted in the start from him. And I'm like, who's this dude? It just absolutely does my head in. Like Justin Ross, everyone's getting back on that one this year, and they're going to look stupid. But that's another story. I mean, first of all, I love this selection because obviously you're a fine co-host of Fan Sanctuary, which clearly is a Jets fan, is a Aaron Rodgers truther, like number one in his fan club. So love that you've come on and put Rodgers up to sell. I have got a lot of Rodgers, but I do agree with you the fact that if you can get this price at QB24, it's opened the fire exit, I guess, to move off him. And just things like playing slow and Dynasty best ball, you want to have boom weeks, and I can't really see boom weeks. He's not bringing anything on the ground. Yes, we know his Hall of Fame passer, so efficient. He's probably going to have 5 interceptions max this season, as he does every season. But yeah, if he's going 25 and 5, you'd rather him be in that 30-30 club because it's more fun as well.
Yeah, I mean, like last year, you go back to 2021, and he was 10 games where he scored 20 or more fantasy points. Last year, he had just one of them, and his highest QB finish was QB9. You just hit a point where it's like it's so difficult for Aaron Rodgers to compete with dual threats in terms of maximizing his weekly value that what you need is basically 300 passing yards and 3 touchdowns minimum to try and compete with guys who are racking up 40 yards or more through their legs. So I think when I think about where those 300 passing yards and 3 touchdowns can come from, okay, we can give Garrett Wilson, say, 100 a week if we're being optimistic, and a touchdown. That feels completely fine. Then you look around at the rest of it, and it just doesn't feel like that's how this Jets side or Aaron Rodgers really wants to play things.
Yep, all in agreement. Absolutely love it. We'll move swiftly on to the running back position. And who's your sell here?
Well, it is Najee Harris. And I think, Pat Graham, the man who won $2 million playing best ball, termed it well earlier this offseason when he said, is Najee Harris even the best running back on the Steelers? So part of this is to do with Jaylen Warren because, he made it hard to imagine Najee Harris ever getting back to the workhorse days that he had under Ben Roethlisberger, where he played 85% of his snaps that year. Last year, when Jaylen Warren was on the field, it brought down Harris's snaps down to 66%. Warren outproduced Harris in yards per carry, 4.8 to 3.8, yards per reception, 8.3 to 5.5. And Najee Harris blamed the lack of explosiveness on the injury and said that he felt much more explosive after he'd had the screws out of his foot or whatever was wrong with it. But you go back and look at the splits, and he wasn't any more explosive. Like, the big runs just didn't come. He wasn't that type of player. Whereas Jaylen Warren looks more explosive. Najee Harris is RB14 on Keep Trade Cut, and it's not an area of the draft where I'm particularly mad about taking running backs in general. And I don't want to have that amount of draft capital in running backs who I don't think are truly elite. And I definitely don't think Najee Harris is truly elite.
Yeah, I think this one was a predictable pick from sort of just going back a few years, knowing you over the years, Tom, and all the love or hate that you gave to David Montgomery as a volume guy
Yes.
That's non-explosive, getting by with touchdowns or a lot of high volume of dump-offs, but not doing a ton with it. So he's an interesting one, Harris, because I think he's going to get volume. Is he going to give you the ceiling? I can't see it in the offense. There's concerns about Kenny Pickett in my head. You've got excellent guy in Deontay Johnson who's going to be getting 150, 160 targets. Pickens was a great prospect in my eyes, someone that it could be anything. It could be a mega this season. We don't know that. And obviously, Fryermuth's excellent. Even Allen Robinson's there as well, but we're not going to talk about him too much. Yeah, I think running back 14, I'm kind of fine with it, but it's all about what your expectations are, what you're building. If you're expecting someone that's going to give you boom weeks, he's not the guy. And I think with the way we're seeing the current climate as well, you can probably get his production at running back 25.
Agreed, Rashad White. But yeah, Najee Harris, for me, I think it's building up towards what could be a really good year for Najee Harris on paper. A lot of people are saying they've upgraded their offensive line. They're bigging up Kenny Pickett for a really big year. They've got better pass catcher weapons there now. So they look all set to have an improved offense. And Najee Harris, if he maintains that same volume, is going to reap the rewards of that. But I think it was the sleeper show we had a few weeks ago where brought up Jaylen Warren as a guy that I really like. As you mentioned, all them stats where he outperformed Najee Harris when he was on the field. I just really hope they give him more of a workload, because that if they had a 1-2 punch rather than giving Najee Harris the rock, I think that'd be more efficient for their offense. But we'll have to see. I'm not the biggest fan of Kenny Pickett. I have a few question marks on this offense. So I think Najee Harris is definitely, you can try and build him up to be someone that you want to sell this offseason, because if he doesn't hit the heights like he has done before, what's his value going to be like this time next offseason? So I think now is going to be the peak. I think his value can only possibly go down from here. So yeah, we'll move on to your wide receiver sale. So who is it, Tom?
Yeah. Speaking about players whose value is going to drop over next year, it's not going to be the most popular, but DK Metcalf. I think DK Metcalf, he's one of these players where he's not an alpha receiver, but because he's built like one, a lot of the time he gets pushed up into this category where people talk about him such. Like, last year he finished the season as wide receiver 25 in half PPR points per game. Since then, the team's added Jackson Smith-Njigba, who widely was viewed as the best wide receiver in the class. And although their styles of play are very differently, it feels entirely possible that the way that Jackson Smith-Njigba wins the ball could easily eat into what DK Metcalf gets from the offense as well. And his production's been on a knife edge, in my opinion, because he's never been able to separate from Tyler Lockett in terms of target share. You look at it over the last few years, it's always very close, like 1 or 2% either way. So he's never been able to draw that many targets over Tyler Lockett. And now you're talking about adding a volume hog wide receiver in Jackson Smith-Njigba. So I think it could clearly go down because Seahawks clearly want to go 3 wide receiver more. Shane Waldron, who's the offensive coordinator, he was with the Rams before he came over to the Seahawks. And whilst he was with the Rams, they had Cooper Kupp there, and you're talking about one of the players who's been the most productive player out of the slot over the last few years. The Seahawks couldn't play a slot receiver there last year. These are the guys who had over 50% snap rate in the slot at various points through the season. Marquise Goodwin, Dwayne Eskridge, Penny Hart, Cade Johnson, Laquan Treadwell. They couldn't play 3 wide receiver set because there was no point. You were better off getting Will Dissly and Noah Fant both on the field at the same time and going 2 wide receiver, 2 tight end. So now you're looking at it and saying, okay, well, they can add Jackson Smith-Njigba to it. Tyler Lockett is perennially undervalued. And I feel like it's going to be a year where we see DK Metcalf's targets, fantasy production all come back. And at the minute, as wide receiver 14, you can go out, you could sell him directly for Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, Kyler Murray, Kyle Pitts, and Tua. I'd take all of those players in a heartbeat over him.
Yes, it's well said. DK Metcalf feels like a guy that should be doing better than what he is doing right now. I think, as you mentioned, he's a massive dude. I think I absolutely just love him just because of that one play against the Cardinals when he chased down, was it Buda Baker? I'm like, where's that top gear when he's on offense? It is frustrating. And as you mentioned now with JSN in the building, and also Tyler Lockett. I mean, is Tyler Lockett, is he going to leave the Seahawks at the end of this season, or is he going to be there for another season? I think if DK Metcalf doesn't get, if he's not the target hog of this team or the first read, we're again another year away from that awesome, I think it was wide receiver 6 or 7 finish he had. So again, his value could slip down. And as you mentioned, if you can sell him, especially if you're a contender, sell him for Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, blah, 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 and get a couple of years out of them, I'd take that all day long at wide receiver 14.
Yeah, Metcalf, he just reminds me of a trophy girlfriend. He looks great with his top off, but actually when you get to the bare facts, it's a bit disappointing in the end. I think, splash plays are what gets people in on him. That's what does give me a bit of concern about a guy, George Pickens, where he gets all this hype for stuff
Big
that doesn't really add up on matter. Like Ali said, the one thing he remembers him for is chasing down a guy and tackling him. If that's your best career highlight as a wide receiver, you've got issues, really, haven't you? So, he couldn't ever beat Tyler Lockett. JSN's coming in, a guy that, as a sophomore, put up 1,600 yards or something daft with sharing a field with Olave and Garrett Wilson, who are both top 10 wide receivers as a younger wide receiver to them. So he's the real deal. It's major concern for DK Metcalf. I think this type of format, Dynasty Best Ball, it's great for Seattle wide receivers because I think there will be games where it goes from a Lockett one week to a Jason another week. But like I say, it's great for Seattle wide receivers, just not DK.
Agreed. And we'll finish the sales on another guy that loves himself a splash play. So, Tom, who's your tight end sell?
Yeah, so it's George Kittle, and he's someone which I've taken a pretty hard stance on him. I'm a couple of hundred drafts into best ball season. I think I've drafted him maybe 2 or 3 times. Like, I think it's incredibly easy to see the touchdown regression coming for George Kittle, just like an absolute truck. Last year he had 11 touchdowns. That was second most behind Travis Kelce. But you go back and look through Kittle's career, and he's like always been at about 5-6 touchdowns per year. A couple of seasons were like 2 touchdowns. So he's never been a prolific touchdown scorer. And then you look deeper at the 11 touchdowns that Kittle scored. 6 came against the Cardinals and the Seahawks across a period of 3 games. Both of them, they were bottom 5 defenses against the position all last year. Like, I write DFS matchup column through the season, and all the time you'd start the column going, okay, who do the Seahawks and the Cardinals play this week? Right, let's just chuck the tight end in against them. That's the gimme layup shot. When Kittle wasn't scoring touchdowns, like, he averaged 4.9 half PPR points per game. That's pretty much in line with what Juwan Johnson averaged when he didn't score a touchdown. But you're getting Juwan Johnson in like for a 3rd round pick, but you look at Kittle and you could still go and trade Kittle for a late 1st round pick. Kittle's on and off splits with Deebo Samuel were massive. So when Deebo Samuel was on the field, Kittle scored 9.14 half PPR points. In the games that Deebo missed, that jumped up to 18. And I mentioned it earlier when talking about Deebo. But when Purdy was on the field with all his weapons at the same time, the target share went 30% to Samuel, 23% to CMC, 19% to Ayuk, and Kittle all the way down at 13%. That's just not going to get it done for a player that you have to invest this much in. He hit the lowest yards per route run and target per route run since his 2017 rookie season, 2nd lowest PFF receiving grade of his career. There's plenty of reasons why you can look at Kittle and go, he could have already gone off the cliff edge. It's just the touchdowns propped him enough up that we didn't really see it last year. And if I can go out and trade him for, I don't know, like Chris Godwin or another tight end, somebody like Dallas Goedert with a little bit on top, I'd absolutely do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah, Kittle's a really strange one for me because I think the ranking's fine. It's just where the value is for him. I think he's someone that if you're a contender, you're fine having him on your team, and you're just hoping really that it continues the touchdowns. Obviously, everyone thinks 49ers are going to be best team in the NFC, like they weren't last year. But yeah, I think a lot depends on Purdy again. If he's going to be the main man, they're going to be in the red zone a lot, so I think there will be opportunities for him. Like I said earlier, though, some weeks it's going to be him, some weeks it's going to be Deebo, Ayuk, CMC, etc. So it is going to be really tough. I think, again, I wouldn't want to have too much exposure to him because he's getting to an age where it could all go wrong really quick. He's going to age a lot worse than Travis Kelce, so people shouldn't be expecting that. We know how good a blocker he is. So, yeah, I think where I'm at on Kittle is it's obviously team dependent based on his age, but also it's value based rather than rankings based.
Yeah, I just think George Kittle could end up the odd one out as long as the wide receivers and CMC stay healthy. For the Niners, through the first 14 weeks of the season, you were incredibly unhappy with George Kittle on a weekly basis. And then he had 7 touchdowns in the final 4 games. So it's a story of 2 halves, and you've only got 4 really decent games out of him, albeit with Brock Purdy. So it'd be interesting to see how they start the season. But at tight end 5, you're probably looking for someone who's going to consistently score you decent points week in, week out, and not let you down. Where George Kittle could do can win you a week, but if he's not scoring them touchdowns, and Deebo and Ayuk are on fire and CMC, you're getting the volume. George Kittle is going to let you down on a weekly basis. So with that, we'll move on to the fantasy wildcard selection. So we're now going to come on to the wildcard selection, where we get Tom to pick his fantasy wildcards, the player that will improve their dynasty value the most in 2023. So there was plenty of players that you couldn't pick from, Tom. But who's the player that you're going to select this season?
Yeah, and it just speaks to the caliber of guests that you guys get onto this show, because when I opened this up, I was like, okay, I feel like I'll probably be able to pick one of my kind of favorites, one of my guys of this year. You look through and go, okay, well, Chris Olave, Drake London, Rashad Bateman, Jerry Jeudy are all gone. What about Trey McBride? Gone. And then like Antonio Gibson, I could have made a case for him. Even sort of like, Deontay Johnson, who also was taken. So the guy who I ended up landing on is Nico Collins, who's available for a late second. You could probably package up even some later picks from that to get him. But I think there's plenty of reason for optimism. I'm quite kind of sneaky high on this Texans team in general. I think the offensive line is going to be a real strength this year. They've paid both their tackles this year, and they're two very good tackles. So that should give CJ Stroud plenty of time to operate from the pocket. And what we saw from Nico Collins last year, he went from a 13% team target share in 2021 to 19% last year, and he had 6 games where he had even over 22%. He was tied for 6th in total targets for wide receivers between I think it was between like week 10 to week 13 when he was really getting it done. He finished 2nd in contested catch rate last year. He had 36 targets in his last 4 games with 2 touchdowns. It just seemed like things had moved away from Brandon Cooks, who we know had a difficult season because he was like unhappy with things in Texas anyway. But it just felt like Nico Collins was just a far more productive, far more electric player. And now you give him CJ Stroud, who, yes, we don't think possibly that he can ever have a necessarily truly elite ceiling. But you look at what Nico Collins has had over the last 2 years, and it's been pretty miserable with Davis Mills. And I have enough faith in Nico Collins. I know Matt Harmon's really thinks he's going to have a good season. He has a 70% win rate against man coverage, which is really good. So, I think when you look at players, when we're specifically talking about how much their value can increase, I wouldn't be surprised to see Nico Collins go from being available for like the 212 to being available for like the 202, the 21 by the time we talk next year.
Yeah, I like this pick. I like a guy where we're selecting it a bit deeper, and I think there's certainly progression for him to move up. I know that I like CJ Stroud. He's still my rookie quarterback too. I really like the offensive line, as you mentioned there. I think that a lot of people could be surprised at how good CJ Stroud can be on the Texans. A lot of people really hated that landing spot, but I really quite like it. And Nico Collins, the reports are that CJ Stroud is targeting him really often. He seems to be the favorite target. We're just looking for one guy to come out of this Texans room who I think can improve his value in Dynasty. And it could well be Nico Collins. He'd be the guy that I'd say would be the early favorite. There's 2 or 3 others, but none of them are big standouts. Let's see what Nico Collins to do. I really like this. I can, with a half decent season, I can see him being wide receiver 40 next year. And as you mentioned, Tom, probably valued as an early to mid 2nd round pick.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd have spoke to us 3-4 weeks ago and said, right, 2 of your 3 next wildcard selections are going to be Texans wide receivers, I'd have been like, whoa, that's pretty crazy. Obviously, I met you a couple of weeks back with Jordan, and then we've got Nico Collins today. So a fun little battle between you guys to which one comes out on top there. But I think there's a lot of things, like you both mentioned, that play into his favour. The fact that he's ranked so low, he's at a position where it's a wide open wide receiver room. It's a team where people see the HOU next to the name and they think, they're trash. So that's going to change in time. CJ Stroud, he's an excellent prospect, well regarded. He's going to be way better than Davis Mills. So you can paint a picture where someone's going to emerge. I really like Nico Collins, the prospect coming out. The fact that he had the size, the speed. He'd done a few bits in college that really impressed me. So, yeah, Nico Collins season, I can definitely see it. He's got to get past Dalton Schultz, who was an old favourite of mine many years ago, but he's actually terrible. So, I think volume-wise, he shouldn't have too much of an issue getting those targets from Schultz. But, yeah, if he does emerge as a wide receiver one for CJ Stroud, who real life's going to be excellent, I think, then yeah, I can see this working out really well for you, Tom.
Yeah, love the pick. All in agreement. Let's see how it plays out for this season. So with that brings us to the end of tonight's show, where we've discussed all things Dynasty Best Ball and got Tom's fantasy wildcard. But before we go, if you are watching on YouTube, just check out Tom's trophy behind him. It is a stunning thing, and he did actually beat Kevin in the final of that competition. So I had to just get that in there.
Jesus,
knife to the back.
But yeah, before you go, Tom, please remind the audience where they can find you, and is there anything you'd like to plug?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on Twitter at NFL_T_Strack. All my writing work currently is at Fantasy Pros. You can find us on YouTube at The Fantasy Sanctuary. You know, we cover DFS, we cover Dynasty, Best Ball, Redraft, kind of. I think we're up to something like 320 videos we put out since the beginning of January. So it's just kind of trying to make sure there's something for everyone there. And, you know, pleased to say that we've had all you guys on at different points this off season, and just looking forward to the season starting. So thanks for having me on.
No, absolutely love having you on, Tom. You're an absolute legend of the UK scene. You've got your fingers in many pies right now, and the Fantasy Sanctuary is incredible. Go check out all the videos, because it's such a wide range, and from best ball to Dynasty and all sorts of stuff on there. It's absolutely brilliant. So cheers for coming on. And is there any final thoughts from you, Kev?
Yeah, I think I just heard a few people rushing to get on T-Strack's Twitter and following Fantasy Sanctuary, etc. But no, just thanks for coming on, Tom. It was a huge disappointment I wasn't on last year because I had COVID. So yeah, to spend time chatting with you, it's always one of my highlights of the off season. You talk a lot of sense, you're logical. One of the best in the community, actually, especially when it comes to best ball. So I'm sure the audience will have got a ton from this, as I do in every one of our interactions. So yeah, thanks for coming on. It's been a pleasure as always. Our friendship continues to grow.
Yeah, well, you know, the feeling's mutual. You know, I've got a lot of respect for you guys, and I wouldn't have found my way into this without coming across the old first iteration of your podcast, Kev. So a lot of time for you guys always.
Love it. And with that, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to follow us and subscribe on X or Twitter and YouTube at Fantasy Wildcard and at Wildcard Dynasty. And join us for every show every Wednesday via the podcast on X/Twitter and YouTube. So thank you once again. Have a good one, and we'll see you.